I just want to say to my home church at Trinity United Methodist Church in Pearl City, to my friends and family here, thank you so much for coming. I know, especially for my home church, all the aunties and uncles that I have here, it's usually unusual for them to see me dressed in an aloha shirt, slacks, and shoes, as I usually come to church 5 to 10 minutes late, usually in a tank top, board shorts and slippers, because I just came surfing. But I love how no matter how I show up, they love me and care for me and support me. And just because of this moment, I dressed up and I cut my surf time short. So thank you for all of that. So while I spoke publicly about my sexuality in other public venues, I did this last year with Wahiawa United Methodist Church on Zoom. This is going to be my very first time talking about it in person, not on Zoom, in a setting amongst all of you. Faith plays a significant part of my life. Faith defines who I am and has driven me to do what I do. While my mother knows I'm gay, not everyone in my family does. I have yet to still have an honest discussion with my father about my sexuality, but the fact that I'm sharing my sexuality in this setting demonstrates how supportive and loving you all are. I feel safe, I feel comfortable sharing my story with you. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for listening. And while I do that, let me drink some water. So we all know Psalm 23. It's a famous verse, and it's a reminder of God's restful presence in uncertain, uncomfortable times, especially the ones we are in now. Recently, when Pastor Sione asked me to share my story, I thought about this verse in the context of my faith as a gay man. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. See, coming out isn't a one-time thing. Coming out is a process, a journey to accepting and loving your most authentic self. And while I've come out to myself and my loved ones, I still feel like I'm walking through the darkest valleys. I feel like I walk in the darkest valleys when family members ask me, "Brad, where's your girlfriend? Why you stay single? When you gonna have kids?" I feel like I walked in the darkest valleys when I came out to a trusted faculty member in college. And she responded by praying that, quote, "I realized the light one day." As a kid, I felt like I walked in the darkest valleys when my old Assemblies of God pastor in my hometown of Waialua preached about homosexuality. He said it was an abomination. He said that homosexuality would take you to hell, and that by the power of God, you can change. I remember my mom one time quietly whispering the piece, "Amen." Then after service, my pastor would mention all the girls he thought I should date and marry. I think he was a little off about my type. I felt like I walked in the darkest valleys when my dad, excuse my language, one time called me a faggot as a kid when I put my hands on my hips or placed them on my stomach because I looked too girly. And while I know it's not good for me to think this way, I like to think that fulfilling his dream of me being an officer in the military will make me look more masculine, and one day make him more accepting of my sexuality. I felt like I walked in the darkest of valleys in high school when my boys in school would call me, as a joke, Danny Gay. Even though it was meant as a joke and a good manner of teasing among the bros, deep inside, it made me scared to come out and feared that if they actually knew the truth, they wouldn't invite me to surf for them anymore, wouldn't let me play sports for them anymore, go hiking or chill at their house. I feared at one point I could no longer be one of the boys. I felt like I walked in the darkest valleys when I first came out to my mom 6 years ago. I wasn't planning ever to come out to my mom, especially knowing how religious and conservative she is. But I had no choice when a medical bill accidentally went to my address in Hawaii from an LGBTQ healthcare provider in DC, and she called me to explain. In the middle of work, I broke down in the office, and my boss and coworkers had to hold me and guide me to a private room where they held my hand as I came out to my mom in a very hasty and unplanned way. She cried, she said she loves me, but not the sin, and prayed I'd seek the truth. That difficult discussion was followed by a series of long arguments that went on for a few years about whether this part of me is legitimate. I can go on, but the point is, I still feel like I walk through the darkest valleys. I remember the first time I realized this part of me. I was 12 on a family vacation and saw a boy around my age playing around the basketball courts. I had this weird attraction to him, and it didn't sit right. Growing up in middle school and high school, I'd have crushes on guys, and when I did, I'd cry in the bathroom or on my bed, praying to God to stop these feelings and tell him that the devil is tempting me and that I needed an intervention in my life. There were times I contemplated hurting myself, and when a guy tried to ask me out, I'd get mad, throw a fit, and be offended that they would even think I was gay. I left the islands after graduating high school in 2012 to Seattle for college. College was the first time in my life I felt free. For the first time, I started exploring my sexuality, and at first it was pretty fun, getting so much attention, doing whatever you wanted without telling your parents or letting your parents know. However, the insecurities and the feelings of self-hate remain. I started drinking, and while it's normal to drink in college, there were moments when my drinking brought out the worst out of me. It brought out some anger. Got into a fight one time with my best friend in college, said horrible things to other friends that almost ended our friendship. A professor noticed my behavior and asked me to see a therapist to work out my issues, accept my identity as a gay man, and set boundaries for the kind of adult I want to be in this world. When I moved to Washington, D.C., after college, I continued to date and got a job for United We Dream. It was an immigrant rights organization. This also was the workplace where I came out to my mom. And I like to think that Washington, D.C. was the place I grew up. For the first time, I had a boss that was a gay man of color and colleagues of mine who are members of the LGBTQ plus community. Working alongside of them in a professional environment and worthy cause helped me to see a different side of this community that I was a part of. Thanks to my colleagues at United We Dream, they introduced me to my first Methodist church service at Foundry United Methodist Church. And what I loved about Foundry was they attended our rallies and civil disobediences, but they were also affirming allies of the LGBTQ plus community. They participated in the pride parades and had Bible studies with our community. In that process, my faith began to heal. And I started reconciling with myself about what God's calling was for my life as He directed my path. While I still struggle with my sexuality and still have worries about acceptance, I realize when God places me near still waters, or, as the surfer in me likes to say, nice, glassy overhead sets. Who doesn't want those? But if the uncles get them, that's fine. I let them go. But He tells me all will be okay. His rod and staff comfort me. His rod and staff comfort me when my mom made minor remarks that seemed slowly accepting of who I am. Last year in the summer, I went jumping off Waimea with my old coworker and brought him to my house. My mom complimented how cute he was and asked if we were dating. I chuckled and said no. She smiled and asked, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yes, Mom, he's straight." His rod and staff comforted me when my dad allowed my gay cousin and his boyfriend to stay over at our house for a week, having fun conversations with them and not making a single offensive remark when they held hands or cuddled on the couch. His rod and staff comforted me when one time I came back home from college and my surfing buddies and I were about to paddle out, when I had this urge to tell them the truth. And as we paddled out, I just randomly said, "Guys, I'm gay." They paused, they stared at me for 5 seconds and said, "Cool, man, keep paddling." His rod and staff comfort me when I get the opportunity to share my sexuality for the first time at a church. And while this conversation is not easy and it might be uncomfortable, the fact that we are even having this conversation as a church gives me comfort that this church sees me and hears me. To those on the fence about the church becoming affirming of the LGBTQ plus community, I could stand here and share my resume, and that was nice, pastoring me, and boast about what I do, and hoping that it will be a buffer for my acceptance, because I've had a tendency to do that, I think, growing up. But I've realized, regardless if someone has a PhD or a high school degree, whether you consider them masculine or feminine, if they make 6 figures or minimum wage, every member of the LGBTQ plus community deserves to be loved and accepted. We are children of God, created in His image. Before we were in the womb, He already knew us. If you do not allow us to live our truth, it will discourage us from fulfilling God's purpose for our lives and the building of the church. We all know that church membership for my generation is declining, and it's no surprise. Our community for too long has been chastised and traumatized by the church. We've heard the toxic phrases, "This is just a phase," or that we could be prayed to be cured. But people in my community have died because of that kind of attitude. Unless we as a denomination take a hard look at our values and assess what it truly means to be the church, our community cannot feel fully included. I was told when I came out to be the person your younger self needed. And so to those who are members of the LGBTQ plus community, especially the young people, whether you are out or not, God sees you, God hears you, God loves you. I know sometimes it might feel lonely to live your truth. You might question whether this part of you can actually exist, whether you can have these feelings. You might ask yourself why you are even here. You might question whether you yourself should even exist at all. I get it. I've been there. I know what it's like to feel hopeless, depressed, and anxious about the kind of future you can have. It keeps you up at night. You yearn simply to love and be loved. And let me just say, whatever journey you are on, trust that God will take you through the darkest valleys, lead you to quiet waters, and restore your soul. While our journeys in becoming our most authentic selves are different, I know this, and you will realize God's love for you prevails. If any blessing comes from being gay, it's the empathy you develop for others. And I can say this for myself. My coming out process has allowed me to empathize with those who feel marginalized, who feel out of place, who feel alone. I've learned how to be a better listener and to approach every person I meet with an open heart, an open mind, and to respect and accept them for how they come. And I know this because it's what I want for myself, and I know that's what you all want for yourself too. That is why, as a LGBTQ plus community, we have to stick together. We can't expect people to love and accept us when we can't accept each other. That means addressing the racism, ableism, elitism, misogyny, fat shaming, and transphobia plaguing our community. We too need to play a part in reflecting what the church should be, the place of love and an example of God's compassion. As I continue on my journey to becoming my most authentic self and living my truth, I still face doubts about who I am and whether I am still worth it. However, the fact that I wake up every day and am alive is a reminder that God has already prepared a table before me in the presence of my enemies. I'm blessed because He's already anointed my head with oil. My cup truly overflows. His goodness and love still follow me. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So, my prayer for all of you today is that God will lead you beside quiet waters and restore your soul in these difficult times. Thank you.